Since the prehistoric days of hunting and gathering, meat has been an incredibly special food for humanity. It was absolutely delicious but notoriously hard to come by. Honestly, survival was completely doable just on the fruits and seeds gathered by the women of the tribe. If they were lacking protein, they could easily hit their essential macros with fish or bugs. Even so, that craving for fresh red meat from warm-blooded animals was so intense, the able-bodied men of the tribe willingly endured the massive inefficiency of risking their lives to hunt for days on end, only to come up empty-handed. Even after the dawn of agriculture, this obsession with meat didn't fade. Instead, meat cemented itself as the ultimate luxury item, a pure symbol of power and privilege. Even when people raised livestock, it was mostly for byproducts, like milk and eggs, or for farm labor. Slaughtering them just for their meat was a terribly inefficient move. But human greed knows no bounds, and history always repeats itself. Sometimes starving poor folks would slaughter their own livestock in desperation, only to completely ruin their harvest the following year. Other times, the wealthy would monopolize the land to create massive pastures for their cattle, leaving people homeless and wandering overnight. In some societies without suitable livestock, cannibalism wasn't even that uncommon. So, the wise men of the ancient world realized they needed a heavy-duty safety mechanism that went against human nature just to preserve the community's productive capacity. The idea was to draw a hard line between what was edible and what wasn't, and strictly enforce it. And the wise men of that era were, ultimately, the priestly class in charge of rituals. These survival guidelines were seamlessly woven into the fabric of religion so they'd be easy for the uneducated masses to digest and follow. When it comes to world religions, we usually talk about the Big Four: Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism. The two largest, Christianity and Islam, are actually sister religions from the same root. Along with their common ancestor, Judaism, they are grouped together as the Abrahamic religions. Among these, Islam is famously known for strictly forbidding the consumption of pork. And the original pioneer, Judaism, has dietary restrictions on meat, including pork, that are far more extensive and stringent than Islam's. Honestly, pigs are incredibly easy animals to raise in many ways. They eat almost anything, and their feed-to-meat conversion rate is so remarkably high that they are basically nature's ultimate cheat code among mammals. However, the ancient Jews primarily lived in the barren deserts of the Middle East, where hardly a drop of rain fell. These were harsh, unforgiving lands with a very low carrying capacity. And in extreme environments like this, pigs suddenly become the absolute worst animals to raise. Pigs don't have sweat glands, so they drop like flies in the heat. Since the desert has no natural shade, you have to build them their own cool shelters. On top of that, in a place where food is already scarce, pigs are omnivores, meaning you have to share human food with them. The most fatal flaw? Pigs need to roll in water or mud to cool down, but water is incredibly scarce in the desert, so they end up rolling around in their own feces and filth. So what happens then? The more pigs you raise, the less food there is for humans, leading directly to starvation. Plus, those filthy living conditions turn into a breeding ground for rampant infectious diseases. For these reasons, Jews and other people in the Middle East strongly preferred ruminants like cows, sheep, and goats. They provided farm labor, milk, wool, and leather. Since they ate grass, they didn't compete with humans for food, making them the perfect, reliable livestock for arid regions. At the end of the day, raising pigs in the Middle East was practically insane, and hardly anyone was actually doing it. Yet, despite this reality, Judaism specifically targeted pig farming and outright banned it. Nobody in their right mind was going to do it anyway, so why did they go out of their way to make it official and bring the hammer down on it? Surprisingly, it's because people kept trying to raise pigs even in these terrible conditions. Why? Because they already knew exactly how incredibly delicious pork was. Actually, way back around 5000 BCE, this entire region was a lush green landscape covered in forests. Naturally, introducing pigs back then was no problem at all. They raised them successfully and enjoyed eating them. However, a long history meant their agricultural history was also thousands of years ahead of other regions. Because of this, the soil was depleted early on, the environment began to degrade, and raising pigs eventually became impossible. In other words, they used to eat pork all the time, but as the environment was destroyed, it became harder and harder to put it on the menu. By the time the Old Testament was written, the desertification was already complete. It was a tragic scenario. They knew the taste of pork, but could no longer afford to eat it. But here's the catch. In the few areas that still had some woods and water, or among the mega-rich who could afford massive breeding facilities, they just couldn't let go of the taste and stubbornly kept raising pigs. Pork became a status symbol, a privilege of the wealthy, and quickly turned into a volatile factor that deepened social discontent and inequality. That's exactly why it was completely banned in the name of religion, ensuring absolutely no one could eat it, regardless of their social class. If the rule was simply, hey, this wastes land and water, so cut it out, the elite few would just have flaunted their wealth and raised pigs anyway, right? So framing it as a matter of faith, eating pork taints your soul, was simply the best and equitable way to hold society together. So this strict rulebook of Judaism makes its way to Rome and gives birth to Christianity, and later heads over to the Arabian Peninsula to spawn Islam. But here's the funny part. Christians happily chow down on pork, whether it's bacon or sausage, while Islam carries on the Jewish tradition and still strictly forbids it. The reason is pretty simple. It all came down to their respective environments. They allowed it where it made sense and banned it where they had to. The Roman Empire, where Christianity was born and spread, controlled the resource-rich coastal cities of the Mediterranean and the dense, lush forests of Europe. If they had forced these Europeans, who had water and forests in abundance, to give up pork, the Christianity we know today probably wouldn't exist. On the flip side, Islam originated in the hot, arid Arabian Peninsula. Naturally, telling the people of this region that pigs are filthy, don't eat them, was a doctrine that made total practical sense. They rapidly expanded their power by conquering Egypt, North Africa, and the Levant at lightning speed. These conquered regions shared the same dry climate as the Arabian Peninsula, Islam's birthplace. Naturally, it was easy for them to embrace Islamic lifestyles and doctrines. In many cases, they actually welcomed Islamic rule. However, the Iberian Peninsula, which was conquered around the same time, fought tooth and nail for centuries and eventually drove out the Islamic forces. Where is the Iberian Peninsula, you ask? It's the place that still dominates the globe today with top-tier pig breeds like Iberico and incredible pork dishes like jamón. Trying to force people like that to stop eating pork? Obviously, they were going to put their lives on the line and rise up against it. Meanwhile, on the other side of the planet, Hinduism, the major religion of India, takes the exact opposite approach and strictly bans the consumption of beef. Hinduism is an Indo-Aryan religion, making it practically cousins with Buddhism. Buddhism is famously known for forbidding the killing of absolutely any animal. Similarly, many religions originating in India have doctrines against taking a life, so you could say this is a common trend among faiths from this region. So while Hinduism isn't quite as strict as Buddhism, it generally doesn't encourage eating meat either. The major difference, however, is that they treat the cow as the ultimate sacred cow, an absolutely untouchable entity that must never be eaten, but rather revered and worshipped. So unlike the Islamic world, which branded pigs as filthy and banished them, cows in India are wandering all over town living their best life. The truth is, Indians and Hinduism didn't always worship and protect cows from the very beginning. The actual ancestors of Indian culture were the Aryans, who invaded from the north around the 15th century BCE. One branch of these Aryans headed west to become modern-day Europeans, while another branch moved southeast to become northern Indians. Originally, the Aryans were a highly combative warrior race who herded cattle and sheep, rode horses, and had absolutely zero qualms about eating meat. So, when they first entered India, the Aryans loved chowing down on beef in keeping with their traditions. Their culture involved slaughtering dozens or even hundreds of cows as sacrifices for a single ritual. What's fascinating is that despite being descendants of the same Aryans, the ones who went west to Europe bent Jewish law to their liking, creating a new religion, Christianity, that basically greenlit eating all kinds of meat, while the ones in India moved toward restricting meat, an evolution stretching from Buddhism straight into Hinduism. And just like Judaism's ban on pork in the Middle East, this was another survival safety mechanism responding to environmental changes. When the Aryans first showed up in the Indus River Valley, the Indus Valley civilization was in severe decline, much like Mesopotamia, due to extreme climate change and soil depletion. Entering this landscape as the new ruling class, the Aryans let their cattle graze on whatever precious little pasture land was left. The Aryans completely dominated the native population by establishing the caste system, divided into 4 tiers: Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. Naturally, the absolute highest tier, the Brahmins, was reserved strictly for the Aryans. According to ancient Aryan religious traditions, slaughtering cows, eating the meat, and offering them on altars was an exclusive role and privilege enjoyed only by the Brahmins. However, northern India's environment was rapidly deteriorating out of control. The population kept booming, but pastures for cattle were shrinking. The native population's resentment towards the Brahmins, who were monopolizing all the remaining cattle and farmland, grew until it was ready to explode. Right in the middle of this boiling crisis, Buddhism burst onto the scene like a comet. Preaching that all people are equal and do not kill unnecessarily, Buddhism naturally captured the hearts of the oppressed Indians and spread like wildfire. Backed into a corner by the rise of Buddhism, the Brahmins decided to evolve their existing doctrines to counter the crisis. That upgraded, revamped version is exactly what we now know as Hinduism. By the standards of the time, Buddhist teachings emphasized strict discipline, making it way too hardcore for the average person. However, Hinduism, a mass-market revision of the old Brahminic religion, was far more accessible and intuitive. Hinduism even pulled off a brilliant masterstroke of assimilation by incorporating Siddhartha, the founder of Buddhism, as one of the avatars of a Hindu god, eventually succeeding in wresting back control of Indian society. The doctrine of "thou shalt not kill or eat cows" was forged from these exact political and environmental angles. By doing this, they transformed the cow into the ultimate sacred cow, a figure of such supreme authority that it became absolutely untouchable and divine in the eyes of every Hindu. With this shift, the role of the highest-ranking Brahmins changed too. In the past, they were the ones slaughtering and sacrificing cattle. Now they rebranded themselves as the very elite leading the charge to protect them. In reality, the Hindu doctrine of cherishing cows and forbidding their consumption brought massive benefits to the Indian masses. Even when devastating droughts hit, farmers held out, doing everything in their power to keep their cows alive rather than slaughtering them for a quick meal. And unlike European aristocrats, wealthy Indians didn't force enclosures on peasant lands just to raise their own herds. Thanks to this religious protection, even relatively poor farmers could maintain at least one small cow and a tiny patch of farmland per household. This essentially acted as the ultimate safety net, firmly supporting the rock bottom of Indian society and preventing its total collapse. Even today, India has countless government-backed cow shelters, and many states have strict laws that outright ban the slaughtering of cows. As of 2022, India's population is around 1.4 billion, and they boast a staggering 300 million cows, making it the largest cattle population in the world. Of course, places like Texas right here in the US or countries like Brazil also have a massive number of cattle, even if it's not quite on India's level. But these corporate farmed cattle in the West are strictly engineered for one thing: yielding maximum meat or milk. They are raised on thousands of acres of land, guzzling countless gallons of water and massive amounts of grain feed, only to be fast-tracked to the slaughterhouse like a factory line, mostly within 3 years. In stark contrast, cows in India live alongside people and pretty much fend for themselves. They are incredibly resilient creatures that casually stroll the village streets, scavenging for food scraps and weeds, easily living for a decade or more. For poor farming families, they are practically their only asset, the ultimate all-in-one livestock that plows the fields and provides plenty of fresh milk. People fundamentally love meat. Unless you're a vegetarian for health reasons or specific beliefs, craving meat is practically hardwired into us. Humans are omnivores, sure, but biologically speaking, we have a highly efficient digestive system that's much closer to that of carnivores. Because it's packed with easily absorbable animal proteins to build our bodies and dense fats for high calories, meat has genuinely been the most perfect, high-quality source of nutrition for all eras. Yet, despite all this, there are literally billions of people on Earth right now who won't even touch certain types of meat. And the mystery behind these dietary habits is mostly the result of survival safety rules, crafted by ancient societies to prevent their own ruin, that have hardened into the unshakable form of faith, enduring to this day. With the climate crisis and environmental pollution growing more severe, we too might one day hit a dead end where our environment and society can no longer hold on, just as our ancient ancestors did. But just as the wise men back then navigated their crises with ingenious religious laws, won't we also find a new solution suited for our era? So, here's today's bottom line. God didn't hate bacon. Ancient dietary laws were just prehistoric climate policies disguised as divine terms of service, because humans will ignore a drought, but they won't mess with hell. This has been Flat Archive. Thanks for watching.